Hello and welcome to Full Scottish. My name is Duncan. 8 years ago today, Scotland voted in an independence referendum to stay in the UK. Much has changed in the past 8 years, and with only 13 months until the date of the Scottish Government's proposed IndyRef 2, we are waiting for results of the UK Supreme Court in October on whether the proposed referendum is within the competency of the Scottish Government. It should be remembered that it has been accepted in the convening of the Scottish Parliament in debates in the Scottish Parliament and in House of Commons at Westminster, that the people of Scotland have the right to determine what system of government in Scotland should have at any time the people of Scotland choose. Today, I'm joined by guests Fiona Grahame and Cary. Fiona Grahame, founder and editor of Orkney News, and Cary from Democrats Abroad. Hello, Kat, and hello, Fiona.
Hello.
So, before we engage you, first, here is the Ukraine update on day 207. The Czech Republic, which currently holds the EU presidency, have called for a special international tribunal following the discovery of a mass grave in Izium in the northeastern Ukraine. More than 440 bodies have been discovered by Ukrainian officials, with some found with their hands tied behind their backs. Satellite imagery has emerged of the recent discovered mass grave site in Izium. The images released by Maxit Technologies show the forest cemetery entrance from March to August of this year. One of the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants, four main power One of the Russians-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants, four main power lines, has been repaired and is supplying the plant with electricity from Ukrainian grid 2 weeks after it went down, the UN nuclear watchdog has said, even though the 6 reactors at Zaporizhzhia, Europe's biggest nuclear power plant, have been shut down, the plant needs electricity to keep them cool. President Biden urged President Putin to not use tactical nuclear or chemical weapons in the wake of setbacks in Ukraine. Asked by CBS what he would say to Putin if he was considering using such weapons, Biden said, don't. It would change the face of war unlike anything since World War II. Biden said the US response would be consequential but declined to give details. On Saturday, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi told Putin that today's time is not a time for war when the pair met during a regional Asia summit in Uzbekistan. Putin told Modi he knew of India's concern about the conflict echoing language, and he had used this with Chinese President Xi Jinping the day before. Speaking to reporters later, Putin vowed to continue his attacks on Ukraine despite Kyiv's latest counteroffensive, and warned that Moscow could ramp up its strikes on the country's vital infrastructures if Ukrainian forces target facilities in Russia. Associated Press report that the Russian president said the liberation of Ukraine's entire eastern Donbas region remained Russia's main military goal, and that he saw no need to revise it. We aren't in a rush, he said after the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Samarkand. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan told leaders at the summit that efforts were being made to finalize the conflict in Ukraine through diplomacy as soon as possible. Activists from environmental groups Greenpeace blocked a shipment in Russian gas from unloading at a liquefied natural gas (LNG) terminal in northern Finland on Saturday. The Security Service of Ukraine said that Russia's Federal Security Service (FSU) officers tortured residents in Kupiansk, a city in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. The Kyiv Independent reports that when FSU officers were in then occupied Kupiansk, they tortured residents and threatened to send them to minefields and kill their families. Well, so again, Fiona and Kat, welcome to our discussion this morning. And we are going to start with the update, Ukraine. As Ukraine forces Russia retreat from occupied city, how many more mass graves will we uncover? And will those responsible for this ever be brought to justice? What do you think, Fiona?
I'm sure more found, atrocities being committed, not just there, elsewhere in the world, But I was trying to find something positive about the war, and it's very difficult. What I could say is that Scotland has taken over 18% of the refugees choosing to come to the UK. And I think that's actually something Scotland should be proud of, that we've opened our homes and our facilities, and we're giving refugees from Ukraine so much support. And I hope that's something we continue to do for all refugees. So, from this side of the world, we can at least do something positive in this appalling situation.
Right, thank you, Fiona. Kat, what are your views on this?
Well, I think that there will be more mass graves found. I think that's kind of inherent in this process. But there's also been areas where they're not mass graves by the Russians. There's a lot of people buried, but they are buried by Ukrainians. With, some are marked with crosses. Some people know that that's where their relatives are buried. It's really important to tell these stories. Hopefully this will weaken Russia's position diplomatically when calling for the peace. Hopefully Ukraine will be able to keep more of its land and more of its autonomy. But it also indicates that we need to keep our attention on this area. And because a lot of the time we will pay attention when the bombs are falling and then kind of back off. So I think as they uncover these mass graves, keeping an eye on what's happening, making sure to tell people, asking why it's not in the press, maybe writing to your representatives asking, are we sending aid for the recovery? Because, war is bad, but the recovery from war is also very difficult on a population. And we need to not forget about them, even if a lot of the headlines are about Ukraine winning.
Thank you so much, Kat. So, I'm also thinking, how does bringing the people who are, who have done all this, who brought this to justice, how does that look?
Sorry, who's bringing them to justice?
Yes, how does that look? And, the people who are responsible, like you said, the mass graves by both Russia and Ukraine forces. So who and how does justice look like at the end from your view?
Well, for my part, I think that there are, it's difficult while the war is still on, but there are investigators to see if any of these things are war crimes that'll be taken forward. It's important that they have access and that we are able to assist the people in Ukraine with finding the truth and looking to see if people had been tortured. Most of these graves that have been uncovered are of civilians and not of soldiers. So it's really important to keep that in mind. These are civilian casualties, which shouldn't be there in times of war.
Thank you. So
I think I'd like to add,
Yes,
I'd
Fiona.
like to add that what's important is that these places are documented now before they're lost, because any war crimes would be investigated afterwards. So everything must be documented now. And unfortunately, it's also a job that archaeologists will have to be involved in, to uncover remains appropriately and hopefully be able to identify the people concerned.
Oh, thank you so much, Fiona. So moving on to the Queen's funeral. As London prepares for arrival of more than 500 visiting dignitaries, from President Biden to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, what, if anything, does this say about UK as it stands on the edge of economic crisis? No. And as the Prime Minister also planning meeting with President Biden at Downing Street is cancelled, what message is the US President sending to the UK? If we can explore this. So, Fiona, if I can start with you.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I've actually just a piece tomorrow for the Orkney News about grief, because we're seeing two things here. We're seeing a well-planned operation, because the late Queen was obviously 96 and they knew she would be dying soon. So all the pomp and circumstance and the arrangements have been well in place for a long time. They're one aspect of things. But what we've also got is a kind of her death triggered in a lot of people a shared feeling of grief, because we're coming through, but we've had 2 years when people were unable to grieve the passing of their own loved ones. And I think some of this incredible mourning that's going on it's a shared feeling of grief that people weren't able to do before. And remember that one of the lasting images of the Queen was covering her own at the funeral of her own husband, Prince Philip. And we know that Boris Johnson and his Tory party people in Downing Street were partying on while she was doing that. So there's a complex mixture of emotions happening with some people who wish to respect the memory of Elizabeth as the longest serving monarch that the UK has ever had. But there's also the other side of things where that grief is in a way manipulated, promote a UK that harkens back to some mythical 19th century empire where everything was wonderful. Food banks don't exist, and COVID hasn't happened, and all the rest of it. So it's a really complex thing that's going on in the moment in the UK.
Thank you. As Kat, as Fiona has mentioned, there has been a mixed, set of emotions from different people. What are your thoughts on this, and what have you come across?
I mean, I didn't grow up here, but like a lot of people, I've never seen the funeral of a monarch. Like most people living in the UK and throughout the world have never seen the funeral of a British monarch. It's a lot. It's very stark to hear people say the cost of living crisis is on the back burner now, and then to see diamond encrusted crowns sitting on a her coffin. I don't anybody who has who is grieving and mourning, I respect that, and that's fine. But I do feel like this is a bit, like Fiona said, I agree with her, it's been manipulated in a way. It's almost an international PR campaign, because if you listen to the news or read news coming out of other countries, the conversations about the colonial history is happening. I don't see it happening as much here, but those conversations are sure to come to light. As far as the meeting with Biden being canceled, it's been moved to Wednesday. So now he's going to meet with Liz Truss in New York at the UN the same day she meets with EU President Ursula von der Leyen. And I think that sends maybe not a loud message inside the UK right now, but I think it sends a loud diplomatic message throughout the world that the world powers they have less patience for the UK's pomp and circumstance and media manipulation than perhaps people living here know about.
Right. So if Kat, I'll first ask you. I'll take you back to what you've said about what other countries and people are expressing themselves about the colonial days, the colonial empire, and have you had anything specifically that you'd love to share or explore, share your opinion on the same?
Sure. In India, the day that it was announced the Queen died, the Prime Minister was renaming a street from King's Road to something, that they chose. I believe that the Prime Minister isn't coming to the funeral, which is kind of a big signal in and of itself. There's been talk about the Koh-i-Noor being returned back to India. That's on one of the crowns. And also there's news that Antigua and Barbados, or Antigua and Bermuda, apologies for
Barbados.
mixing that.
But
The Prime Minister has proposed a referendum within the next 3 years on whether or not to recognize the British monarch as the head of state. So those are some of the conversations happening right now.
right. Thank you. Fiona, is there anything you'd like to add on the same, on what other countries are feeling about this period and what they're saying? Anything that has stood out for you?
Well, I think other countries, like particularly former colonies, they are doing a massive rethink. This is the moment for them to now really consider if they wish a monarch who live within their own country to be their head of state. So I expect all that to happen this year or next year, that they'll do a complete rethink on those links that harken back to when they were exploited by the UK. I think other countries are looking on here kind of mystified because arresting people for holding up pieces of paper saying "Not my king," that's absolutely appalling. I mean, I was just shocked to my core when I saw that, and when I saw a girl being followed because she had a blank piece of paper by two policemen in Edinburgh. I mean, what is going on, and what have we allowed to go on? I mean, that's got nothing at all to do with the death of a monarch. That's all to do with state control of how we all behave. And I think in this political void we've got at the moment, we should be deeply concerned about how the death of the late Queen is being used for many other things.
Thank you. And moving on to President Biden, and yeah, so as Biden has postponed or cancelled the Friday meeting and postponed it to Wednesday in New York. Does this really say something? Kat had mentioned what came out for her. What's your opinion on this? What does this say to the UK?
Well, we're a third nation. We came out of the largest free trade market in the world, the EU. Scotland against its will, as we know that, and our economy is going to the dog, absolutely. So with no international standing whatsoever. I mean, Boris Johnson, look at his behaviour. And now Liz Truss. I mean, what must they be thinking? So nothing surprises me that the UK, as a so-called world power, is being sidelined by all these nations, because there's the UK's got nothing.
Mm-hmm. Wow. All right. So that's really big, considering what has been going on in the main, like the main news, about cost of living, and energy and all that. It's quite interesting, and thank you for sharing on all that and mentioning cost of living, with rumors that 30 billion cuts being planned for the Chancellor's mini budget on Friday, and plans for NI and tax cuts being trailed. What do you think the Chancellor will do for those who do not earn enough to pay tax, and NI for those on universal credit? What do you think he'll do for the small businesses to prevent them from going bankrupt? We've all seen what people are saying out there on how hard these times are. Kat, if I can start with you. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, am I interrupting, Fiona?
So was that you, Fiona? Fiona, do you want to go first, or Kat? Yeah. Sorry, Kat. Yeah, you can go ahead. You can go ahead. Sorry for that.
I think that this current cost of living crisis is worldwide and it's unprecedented, but it's even worse here in the UK, because it happens when there's not enough supply and there's too much demand for products. So we already know that Brexit and COVID have exacerbated the supply issues, but on the other end, it's not so much that the demand has increased so much, but that there's a lot of profiteering going on. There's these big corporations manipulating for their own profit and for their shareholders' profit how much is on the shelves, in order to say you can't give people a bump, a cost of living. Look, if you give people handouts, then it's just going to get worse. So I think it's really important to stand with workers who are on strike. I think that we're ahead for a lot more strikes, a lot more strike action coming up. And if you're thinking, those people get paid more than I do, maybe it's more important to find a union in some way for yourself than to say that the other workers should not be striking. I don't have much faith in anything that the UK government is coming up with for people or small businesses. I think that they've been clear that that is not a priority. And unfortunately, I don't see much of a different line coming from the Labour opposition.
Thank you, Kat. You mentioned about the strikes and people going on strike. We've seen teachers, the council workers, the train workers, and you've also added that we're going to see more strikes in the near future. Does this also mean that people will try to overwork so that they can meet the bills? And do you think this could bring strains in other aspects of life?
I mean, effective strike action does put a strain on the public so that the government has to act. It puts a strain on our everyday lives for a purpose. How will that affect what the UK government is willing to do? Well, when they introduced a windfall tax, they gave the brakes to the corporations. All these packages seem to be benefiting those who make more money than those who need it most. I don't know if people will overwork or not. I'm an immigrant, so it's not as easy for me to get a job as others. Maybe people who are able to work 2 and 3 jobs will do so. But holding our breath and waiting for the UK government to act is all we can do, even though I don't see any relief coming.
Fiona, I'd love to hear your opinion and thoughts on this. The whole cost of living crisis, and and after, what do you think about people who are living under strained situations already? People not earning enough, asylum seekers, people who are surviving on benefits. Yeah.
Well, I'm sitting here in Orkney that produces 120% of its own energy needs, mostly through wind power. I've got the highest rates of fuel poverty in Scotland. And wow, hello, Scotland, you're going to be joining us, because over 60% of Scotland is going to be in fuel poverty with these appalling rises in the energy bills that people are going to be seeing this winter. So we've got winter fuel bills absolutely astronomical. We've got food bills going up, and people are still, there's people still ill from COVID, with long COVID. There's people that have to use more energy in their homes to keep warm because they're undergoing, say, cancer treatments. So we've got all this going on in a nation that is rich in resources. So, government can manage those aspects of our lives. They can ensure that energy bills are not skyrocketing, that energy companies are taxed properly for the massive profits they are making. And that is not happening. So it's a manufactured crisis we're going through. This didn't need to happen. Brexit didn't need to happen. This is what government is supposed to do. It's supposed to manage the enemy so that vulnerable are protected. And that is not going to be happening. The Tories are not doing this. And I'm extremely concerned that people who are already struggling with their bills come this winter will be so worried that they might even self-harm. That's I'm really, really concerned about that. And coupled with all that, a lot of the support agents, people have had their funding cut. So this is not a time for us all sitting back and not doing anything about it. And I'm not surprised that workers are taken to industrial action, because being a member of a trade union means you've got collective power, and they can do something about the state we're in at the moment that maybe we as individuals struggle to articulate our discontent with the government. But at least a trade union do that. And I think we're in for a very cold and a very hard winter.
Yeah. So, do you think, you mentioned conversations, do you think the right people are having the conversation, or do you think we should have more people having conversation, and who are these people, and what kind of conversations would you like to hear yourself being tabled, because it looks very uncertain on how the future holds. We've heard of the short term solutions, but on the long term, how would you see these conversations going forward, and who would you like to see them with?
Well, our politicians are supposed to represent us, and unfortunately, the Scottish Parliament has limited powers, and what all they can do through actions of the Scottish government is to mitigate all these things that are on, and to try and protect the very most vulnerable. But power lies at Westminster with an unelected Prime Minister and her pals. So really, it's very, very difficult to for ordinary people to do anything unless they're in a workplace that has a trade union and they have that collective power. Perhaps as the campaign for independence reignites towards 2023, more actions that individuals can take part in.
Thank you so much. Kat, do you have anything to add on that?
No, not much, except for if you have time or resources to help, please look at the immigrant and asylum seeker communities and efforts to help them, because being no recourse to public funds and being limited in how you can work is really going to put a hurt. And even though we say immigrants are welcome in Scotland, and we live that in a lot of ways, there are ways that it can be manipulated so that these people are still in very difficult positions.
So, Fiona, I'm coming back to you on interest rates and tax cuts. What are your thoughts as we conclude on this agenda of cost of living?
Well, do you mean the big bonuses that the very highest paid in our society are going to be able to reap? The tax cuts are not for us plebs, and anybody that's on a state pension is going to be really struggling, because that's going nowhere fast. That's one of the worst there is in Europe. So the tax is a really important tool that government can use if it so wishes to improve the lives of all of us and to fund essential services. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening with this Tory UK government.
Windfall tax. Kat, do you know anything about this? Do you have anything to say on this, or should we go to Fiona? You're welcome to share your thoughts.
Well, when windfall taxes first came up, the oil and gas, the energy companies said, if you tax us this way, we won't be able to invest in renewables, which is absolute baloney. there's news that's been recently breaking about how energy, like renewable energy, is the cheapest, most effective investment for these companies. So they're not going to harm their own self-interest. When they did introduce a windfall tax, there was a lot of incentives and opt-outs so that these big corporations didn't have to pay their part, and they continue to make record profits. So the things that we need to do is to remember that they can be taxed, they can afford it. We're not going to be putting the future of renewables in jeopardy by introducing a windfall tax on these oil and gas companies. This is them just paying their fair part. Other than that, other than bringing it up, being vocal about it, telling your friends that, all these scaremongering stories about being more reliant on gas for a windfall tax is manufactured garbage. We just have to keep going and keep, I would like to see the labor opposition stand with workers more, be stronger in their anti-corporate stance, or have an anti-corporate stance at all. But we need accountability, and we're not going to see that from the Tory government. So hopefully the Labour and SNP down in Westminster and then the devolved parliaments are able to put a bit of pressure on the UK Tory government.
Quite interesting when we're still talking about, windfall tax and, in amidst a global crisis on climate change. Fiona?
Well, yeah, we are in a climate emergency, and that's another thing that's been quickly forgotten about, as I see people jetting about to end the funeral and using these massive cars and everything like that. It just, the planet, the planet won't die. It's the human species that'll die, and a lot of other species, if we don't do something about the climate. And we've got all the means to do it. We know what needs to be done, but that's certainly not happening. And to just get out the climate, what was COP all about in Glasgow? It's not that long ago, just a matter of months, really. And all that's just by with. So we've got the ability in Scotland to be fully renewable, and to take charge of how we produce our energy, but not whilst we're part of the UK. That won't be happening.
Right. COP26 happened here in Glasgow, and now we are headed to COP27 in Egypt. What kind of talks or presentations do you expect from the UK or from Scotland? Following everything that has been going on, and this being part of a big decision on cost of living, sustainability, climate change. What do you expect from the yeah?
Well, they're all very good at making pledges at time, and anybody can make a pledge, but it's action that we need. And I'm sorry, that's just not happening. And when actions do occur, they're so slow, they're minuscule. We saw at the start of lockdown in 2020, when all those flights were cancelled and people stopped buzzing around in their cars, our air became so much cleaner, and how we actually heard nature. And people went out walking because basically they were told they had to keep, mental health going. And actually that was all really good. And then what are we now, 2 years on, and we've forgotten all of that. We've learned no lessons. Biodiversity is still being lost at an incredible rate. So I don't have great hope hopes. I'm sorry for COP27 or whatever numeral is attached at this time, because, as I say, the actions just don't follow on from these.
Wow. So, Kat, following what Fiona has said, COP27 in Egypt, what would you hope to hear and what do you think will be hard?
I kind of echo what Fiona said about governments moving too slow. I think, it's not a bad thing to have COP conferences every year, but I do think it is down to citizens. I believe it's down to grassroots efforts around the globe. I'm looking forward to a Fridays for Future student climate march in Edinburgh on Friday. My kids are going. I'm going with them. It's really important that we reignite these conversations and these grassroots efforts, because without pressuring the government, they're never going to act, and they're never going to act in time. So it's up to all of us to ensure that they're holding corporations to account, because there's only so much that individual responsibility can do. So we need to use our voice to pressure governments to hold these huge companies that are responsible for these systems that cause so much climate damage to be more climate friendly.
Thank you. I will start with you, Kate. On US politics, has the US Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe and Wade handed the Democrats a path to victory in the midterm?
It's really surprising. Yes, it's surprising to see earlier in the year, going into the midterm elections, with a cost of living crisis, with a fairly unpopular president, according to opinion polls, that all added up to a huge Republican victory. But with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, you're seeing deep red states disagreeing with anti-abortion things. It is energizing people to come and vote. And I think it's really important to keep a red state is a Republican state. Sorry, in America, it's backwards. The conservatives are red and the Democrats are blue, probably because neither party is actually left and red or socialist. So like in Kansas, during their midterm primaries, they were trying to codify an abortion ban. And Kansas is a very, very conservative state, but they did not. They refused to codify outlawing abortion. So with everything split down the middle, the Democrats have brought into the Senate 2 different bills to legalize abortion, which the Republicans have refused to take up. So it is very important. The other thing that's happening is the Republican Party has been kind of tearing itself apart. They're not able to get their message across because Donald Trump is still so much of the story. And whether people agree with him or they grit their teeth, who are conservatives, it is not helping their messaging. So I do think that this upcoming election in November will be more favorable to Democrats. The extent of that is still to be determined.
Before I come to you, Fiona, I'd like to continue with the same, your last comment, Kat, on have the Republicans then reached a new low in using asylum seekers as pawns in their political campaigns? Kat.
Sorry, I thought
So
you
if I
asked
can,
Fiona that
if I
question.
can repeat my question, you said that there is more favor on the Democrats right now, but does that mean there's the Republicans now have reached an even deeper low, using asylum seekers as pawns in the political campaign?
This has been shocking. I'm a Florida voter, so Governor DeSantis, Ron DeSantis, is the governor of Florida who is up for re-election. I have to say that this effort where he paid, or the state of Florida paid, for asylum seekers from Venezuela to be flown from Texas to Massachusetts. Now, this has been seen before. This is pro-segregationists in the 1960s would bus Black people up north and to the same areas. And you see similar things happening in response. The communities are mobilized to help people. Actually, these immigrants have been moved onto a base so they can receive legal and medical care. That was the same thing that happened in the reverse freedom rides of the 1960s. The difference that is very concerning is that the freedom rides in the 1960s were by fringe right-wing radicals, and now we're seeing it from elected officials. Whether they're right-wing radicals or not, they are elected into office, and it's not just an action campaign. Some really disturbing things that are happening is they coerced, of course, with false promises that these people could move. They had already registered with the immigration office in Texas with an address of where to go. The fact that they had to change their address, because this was part of the plan, will make their immigration cases much more difficult, because it's not an automatic thing. People may be trying to reach them at their old addresses. It's very interesting that the Florida governor paid for people in Texas to move, but that's because a lot of the immigrants and asylum seekers in Florida are Cubans, and the Cuban community in Florida are Republican voters. So it's a new low, but it's not one we haven't heard of before. Hopefully the response to this will be just as strong in opposition as it was in the 1960s when they tried this to ship Black people that lived in the South and made them refugees in the northern states.
And I'll come back to you, Kat. Has Trump used up all his get out of jail free cards? I'll come back to you, Kat, on that. But before then, Fiona, I'd love to hear your opinions and thoughts on the same, on the Democrat and Republican on Roe versus Wade, and also on the on the Republicans using asylum seekers as pawns in their political campaigns.
Well, incredible as it may seem, Donald Trump is still going about addressing mass rallies. And of course, his famous wall that we need to build to lots of refugees from Mexico. I mean, this othering and using of people who don't fit into some white like characteristic well, we see it in lots of places. It's not just in the United States of America where people are used and othered by for their ethnicity. But this Donald Trump, addressing mass rallies still after 12 boxes incriminating documents have been found in his home, which he said were just newspaper cuttings, but which have contained state secrets, and not just state secrets of the US, but state secrets of other countries. I mean, that's absolutely treasonous behaviour. And it's kind of strange that his supporters, who call themselves patriots, are still going out to hear that man speak. It's absolutely incredible. I just don't know. I have no explanation. I'm sure somebody could do a fantastic research project on the psychology of how people can still admire someone despite all that he's done, to basically betray his own country.
Oh, thank you so much, Fiona. And back to you, Kat. What are your thoughts? Has Trump used all his get out of jail cards.
I'm not sure if they're all gone, but the noose is tightening, so to speak. Trump is now working as his own spokesperson, his own strategist, and he's having trouble hiring lawyers to represent him because of the things he's asking for and because of his track record. So there's lots of investigations going on. Trump is not the only threat to American democracy. Whether or not the Republican Party is support, the parts that are supportive of him or not, they're still trying to gut states' rights, democratic norms, law and order. So while Trump is he's talking right now about making another run for the presidency, whether or not they're going to indict him or whether or not he's lost popular support remains to be seen. But I think as he's backed into a corner more and more, he's going to become more erratic and he's going to alienate more people.
Moving along, thank you. Let's look at freedom of speech, protests, and respect. I'll come to you, Fiona, first. Was there a message in King Charles visiting Wales on Friday on Owen Glyndwr Day? When is the right time and place for someone to protest against something they oppose?
Oh yes, that somebody should decide when it's respectful enough of us to object to something, or if we should all hold our wheesht, because it inconveniences those we're protesting against. What he did visiting Wales on that very special day for them was dreadful, and also the conveying of the title Prince of Wales onto him, which of course is what Edward first used as a way of, insulting the Welsh. I mean, it was totally insensitive. The firm that we know of as the UK monarchy is usually very good at how they do things, but I think that was definitely wrong. And having a Welsh maternal grandmother, I was very pleased to see that not everybody in Wales just sat back this dreadful insult to them, but went out. And, it's all been peaceful protests, by the way, which I think is to be admired amongst those protesters, because it's a very emotive subject.
Thank you, Kat. Coming back to you, when is the right time and place for someone to protest against something they oppose? You being here,
I think,
and also in the US, if you can share a bit more.
well, I think it's a good question because we hear now is not the time a lot of the time from Westminster. It would be interesting if they could come up with a time that they think is appropriate to see what the turnout would be. It just seems to be the undefined, it's never the time for them. In America, there are certain things in place for certain protests where they will have protest areas and things set up. That depends on state to state. It's not as unified as, the federal government in the US doesn't have the power that Westminster, the central government in the UK has. It would be great I think that's an important question that should be put to all our elected representatives down in Westminster. When is the time? Because I'd love to go out on that day.
Is this, if I can take you back to the US, is this a question as well in the US?
I think freedom of speech is a lot more, it's a lot less restricted. You can't get arrested as easily. I mean, I say that, but the kind of arresting people for blank signs, I think that would have led to a lot more outcry. It would have been covered a lot more rigorously. I think the US actually covered the arrests in Edinburgh and elsewhere in the UK a lot more robustly than they did here. We have NPR and PBS in the US, but they're not the same state-run machine that the BBC is here, the regulating authorities. So freedom of speech is like one of the absolute tenets of being an American. And it doesn't feel like it is here, even if people claim that it is.
Back to you, Fiona, for last words to wrap up this conversation and also on the freedom of speech, protest, and respect. I would, I'm interested in knowing, how does this freedom look like to you? How would it look like if it was a perfect world?
Oh, perfect world. Well, that's what we're all aiming for, and if we're not aiming for it, what are we doing if we're not here to dream and imagine a better place? I mean, that's what we all wish, but new laws have been passed in UK Parliament that limit our freedom. And what you saw happening in Edinburgh, with people just holding up a wee sign written on cardboard, for goodness sake, and people being arrested for breach of the peace for things like that. That's just the start of the erosion of rights that citizens of this country have fought for centuries. Not long ago, the Peterloo massacre was celebrated and remembered, and the 1820 Weavers' Rebellion in Scotland. And those people were transported, some of them were their views, for standing up for their dream that they would have equality and be able to protest peacefully. And we're just, it's just crept in. And our MPs, not our MPs in Scotland, not the SNP ones anyway, but our MPs have passed laws now that limit those freedoms. And it's all just happened without, much of a murmur at all. And as I say, what you saw happening in Edinburgh is just the start, unless we do peacefully resist these laws and limits on our freedom.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Fiona and Kat, for joining us this morning. You've been brilliant. Well, that is it for this week's Full Scottish. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programs. From me, it's goodbye and thank you for watching.